Hello, everybody. I am going to go on YouTube so I can share this stream. But I'm super excited to do this broadcast. I haven't gone live on this channel before, but I am trying to see if I can go live on this channel maybe once a week. So if this is your first time watching, hey there, I'm Dr. Gertrude Nontra, and this is the Bold PhD. And on this channel, my goal is really to talk about non academic careers and the fact that you can actually work in non academic careers with your PhD. Now, today specifically, I want to talk about choosing to go into a PhD program or not. So let me just share this really quickly and we'll get started. Yeah. All right. Okay. Anyway, I don't know. Let's let us get started. So people have asked me. I get a lot of direct messages on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter. I get a lot of these messages, and usually the question is, Dr. G, do you think I should go to graduate school? Do you think I have a master's degree or I have a bachelor's degree? Do you think it's going to be a good idea for me to go to graduate school? Or do you think I should get a PhD? And over the years, I've had multiple people, my friends and people on the internet who know that I have the Bold PhD, ask me this question. And one of the ways, and if you're just joining, thanks you all for joining. I really appreciate you all. If you're on here, please share this to your socials and let's get it underway. But today I really wanted to come on here and talk about deciding to go to grad school or not. Should you get your PhD or not? And I recently made a post on LinkedIn that generated a lot of conversation. And one of the comments was that there's several comments that came under there. But I remember the premise was that I had a friend who had asked me, do you think I should go get my PhD? And, they asked me and I gave my honest opinion and I said no. At the time, I was in a PhD program, probably in the middle of one or about to finish. And I told them the honest truth. And I said, based on what I have gone through, based on my experiences, based on everything that I know, right? And then based on everything I knew about that person, getting a PhD was not going to be a smart idea for them. And the reason why it wasn't going to be a smart idea for them specifically was because they were working in a career they were pretty successful in that career. All right, already, even at that time. And this was almost a decade ago. The job outlook for that particular field was great. It's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. And for the most part, people with a bachelor's degree in that particular career did well for themselves, whether they went and got a graduate degree or not. So for me, for that person, right, asking me if they should go get a PhD sounded counterproductive to their goals in life and the goals that they wanted to achieve, for the goals they wanted to achieve, right? A PhD just sounded too much of an opportunity cost for them. So I advised them and I said, no, I don't think you should get one because you're making money, your job outlook is great. You don't plan on going to teach at a university or do research. Usually that's why most people get into PhDs. And yes, I know that they're non-academic careers and I talk about non-academic careers on this channel, but I just thought it was just going to be too expensive for him to quit his job, his good paying job, go go into a PhD where, yes, PhDs can be funded and you can get money to go and do a PhD. I absolutely know that and lived that. But let's say that you are already making $50,000 or $75,000, uh, you know, you're in the US and you're making that, and most PhD programs pay around $30,000. Well, that means you're taking a $40,000 pay cut. That's the first thing. The second thing is that for the most part, as PhDs, we end up prolonging or delaying opportunities to put money in retirement accounts, opportunities to buy a home. We end up delaying that so much. And sometimes at the end of it, the financial rewards, right? Especially for people that want to stay in academia, sometimes the financial rewards like make you almost regret that you spent all that time going to get a PhD. I'm not saying that I regret my PhD, but it's some of the things I put forth to my friend and asked him to consider. That are you willing to quit a job for 5 to 6 years to earn maybe half of your income, right? And this is not something he could have done part-time. People sometimes suggested to me, well, can you tell them to maybe do the PhD part-time? There are PhDs that you can't do on a part-time basis because it's absolutely impossible. And it's even worse when you are an international student in another country. In most countries where you're an international student, you cannot work off campus. Okay, even if you have a PhD on campus, and whether it's funded or non-funded, even if you wanted to supplement your income, you wouldn't be able to do that. So I didn't recommend it. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, and you probably saw a post I made yesterday about somebody kind of leaving a comment about, a PhD is not about making money. And I beg to differ, I beg to differ because there is a lot of cost, not even just monetary cost, but just so much cost to doing a PhD. It could be an emotional cost, it could be mental cost, it could be psychological cost, but the financial cost people don't realize. And especially when you work in academia, you are expected to sacrifice because that's what everybody has done before you. You are expected to sort of lay down your life, and if you're not doing that, then you're not a very good academic, and sometimes you're expected to just do more and more and more, right? And in a lot of ways, I don't think that that's fair. Or and life is not fair, but eventually it has to make sense somewhere. And I have lived through the experience of thinking to myself, well, was this actually worth it? Was my PhD worth it? I mean, I'm really grateful that I got my PhD. And, I've talked a little bit about how my dad has a PhD, and for him, that represented a ticket out of poverty, right? And yes, for me too, like I believe that the PhD has definitely opened a lot more doors for me than if I didn't have one. We also have to understand social constructs sometimes. I'm an African woman. I'm a black woman. There's so much that is against me just by being those things, right? Sometimes as you enter into a place and you're seen as a black woman, you're not seen as somebody that may be smart enough, or somebody that's well spoken enough, or somebody that can take on a particular challenge. You are fighting against that, against people's prejudices. And sometimes it's not intentional on their part, sometimes it is intentional on their part, but there are built-in prejudices, and you have to fight all of that, right? And so having a PhD for me was crucial, right? And in going far in my career was crucial for that purpose and for several other purposes. And so one of the things that I tell people that ask me that question, do you think I should get a PhD, is, what does that mean to you? What does meaning getting a PhD mean to you? There's a price to be paid in getting a PhD, and there's a price to be paid, we could argue, in not getting one in certain careers, not in all careers. So, as you consider your career right now, what's the cost of getting a PhD, and what's the cost of not getting a PhD? So for those who are joining in, thank you for joining in. This was an impromptu live I decided to do just to say hey to you all. I didn't have a recorded video for today, so I said maybe I should just go live and say hi to everyone. So say hi to me in the comments if you're watching. I want to be able to say hi back. I see a few people are joining in here and there, so you can say hi. But just to it's just a chit chat. And today I was really talking about should you go get your PhD, right? And I talked about reasons why I got mine, right? For me, again, for my father, I represented a ticket out of poverty, which helped us, his children, to live more comfortable lives. And definitely for me, it was helpful. For me as a Black woman, for me as an African woman, it was going to be helpful. It was going to be a ticket to so many doors. It was going to open so many doors for me than if I just had a bachelor's degree. But I have to say that in that time that I stayed in school, okay, let me just even share this. In that time that I stayed in school, I knew nothing. If you're from the US, for those who are from the US, um, there's 401k. There's a 401k program, that you can get when you have a full-time job, and this is a retirement account. Well, by being in school for 6 years, I missed out on 6 years of contributing to a 401k account or contributing to any kind of a retirement account. And these retirement accounts are investment accounts. Okay. It also meant that because I was getting paid a low amount, yes, I did get paid a stipend while I was in my PhD. I got health insurance, which was wonderful, right? But I'll be honest that with that income, if you have a family, it's inadequate. Okay. And then that meant, most of my money covered my bills, my food, my living expenses. There was hardly an opportunity to save money. And back then I hadn't educated myself a whole lot on getting ahead financially, right? And so there's all of these things, and of course I'm better at that. But you do delay how successful you can be. You do delay the money that you can make. And I don't know about you, but that's a little harsh. That's a little difficult, right? That is difficult. And so I really when I talk about whether you should get a PhD or not, today somebody had written that getting a PhD is a love hate relationship, and I totally agree. I love the fact that I was able to learn new things. I love the fact that I was able to be mentored by excellent people. I loved everything. I loved a lot of things, not everything, but I loved a lot of things. But what I didn't enjoy was being broke for such a really long time. I graduated from my PhD when did I graduate? Back in 2015. So I was 32 years old when I graduated, right? I was already into my 30s. For my friends who had simply gotten a master's degree or a bachelor's degree, they had already been on the workforce for 5, 6, 8 years. Okay. And so they were ahead financially. So you really have to consider the financial, not just financial, but all the costs that are involved in getting a PhD and deciding if it's worth it for you. Is it worth it for you? Recently, somebody asked me this. And again, I get these questions almost every single week. I get at least one message in my DMs about somebody asking me, should I go get my PhD or should I not? And I'm just like, what makes the most sense for you? I tell them the facts. I tell them the facts. And the facts are that you're going to be dedicating 5 to 6, even 7 years of your life in school. And you may not get paid a living wage. And, there's all that to consider. If you have a family, you have to consider them. If you don't have a family plan to start one, you have to consider that. If you want to get ahead financially, you have to consider that. If you want to buy a home, you have to consider that. Like, there's so many things to consider, and it's not as straightforward. I wish there was a straightforward answer to should I get a PhD or should I not get a PhD, but it really depends on you self introspecting and choosing, right? Choosing which one of two paths you want to go, right? I've heard this phrase before that everything is hard, so choose your hard. Hey Latifa, hello, thanks for joining. Everything is hard, so choose your hard. right? It's so, so true. Things, and can you guys hear me, see me? I think some of you have been on for a minute, so I guess you can. If you can, just like leave an emoji or something in the comments. We're just chit-chatting here today. So when people ask me that question, Dr. G, do you think I should go get my PhD? I always say, here are the facts. This was my experience. It may not be your experience, but this was my experience. And from my experience, I know it set me back financially. I know that there were things that were, and maybe, you know, I could have become a medical writer without a PhD. Maybe. I know I have writers on my team that don't have PhDs. There are several medical writers that don't have PhDs, right? So I didn't really need a PhD to become a medical writer. Maybe it would have been helpful if I wanted to stay in research or stay in academia and look for opportunities to advance. But to be honest, to be completely honest, there are several careers out there that pay very, very well that don't require the emotional, financial, all the investments that you have to make into a PhD. Which brings me to a point that somebody had made in this discussion that, well, PhDs are not just about making money. A PhD can also be about somebody wanting to gain a lot of knowledge. And I do not dispute that fact, but knowledge and passion and all that doesn't pay the bills. I wish it did. Like, it's so nice to want to pursue knowledge. And I think the pursuit of knowledge is beautiful. But at the end of the day, if I pursue all this knowledge and write all these papers and I'm homeless or can't make my bills or I'm hungry, what's the point? That's where I come from when it comes to this argument of, oh, you shouldn't just do a PhD because of money. Yes, you shouldn't because of money. And if it was because of money, then most of us should not, people should not be doing PhDs or going to a master's program or anything, or even school because of money. Because there's no guarantee that your education is going to make you wealthy. But the reality is that, okay, the reality is that education can put you ahead. And if you came earlier on, I talked about that, how education put my father ahead. Education has helped me. Education is excellent. But at what point do you decide that, I've gotten my bachelor's, I'm in a great place in my life, I have work-life balance, I'm earning a good salary, the job outlook for this job I'm in is great. At what point do you say, maybe a PhD isn't, I'm smart enough to go pursue one, but maybe I should hold back because it could hold me back in so many other ways. So there's an opportunity cost either way, and I always encourage people to consider that. So I know that that's like such a convoluted answer to the question, should I get my PhD or should I not? But ultimately, you have to consider, what do you lose when you get one? What do you lose when you don't get one? What do you gain when you get a PhD? What do you gain if you don't get a PhD? These are all serious questions I think everybody should answer before they decide to pursue a PhD. I had the luxury of not having to consider those questions deeply at the beginning of my PhD because at the time I wasn't married, I didn't have a family. But the moment I got married in the middle of my PhD, the moment I got married, it started a family, it became real, real quick. It became real very, very quickly. Anyway, so I'm just going to open up for any questions. I see a few people here. So if there are any questions you'd like to ask me, please ask. The first part of this video is just answering the question, the question that people ask me every single week, do you think I should go get my PhD? So if you had that question, I hope this was helpful. So I'll also take any questions you have about, the non-academic market, pursuing that, medical writing, any questions that you have. And as hopefully some questions, I'll wait to see if any questions come in. But another thing I wanted to touch on, somebody had reached out today. They are applying to graduate school, and they had asked the question. Um, the question was, do you think I should reach out to the advisors about the PhD program? I think that was the question. And I think it's a great thing to reach out to advisors if you can when you're applying to PhD programs. I think it's great that you can do that because it will give you a sense of who those people are. It's going to give you a sense of what those people expect, and whether or not, if you have a particular, especially for those of you that may have a specific research topic in mind, you can discuss that research topic with the advisor and get their input on that. Because I remember when I first started my PhD program, I was really interested in infectious diseases. And I didn't know a whole lot back then, but I remember that I remember that when I got into the program, I asked, because I had gotten into the program, so I was so excited, but I hadn't done enough due diligence. So when I got in the program, I was really looking for somebody. It was a microbiology and immunology program, and I was really looking for somebody who might be a mentor to me in that respect. And specifically, I wanted to do research in malaria or any tropical disease, right? Didn't know any better, had gotten to this PhD program already. So I got started. And then I got in there and I realized, oh, nobody really does research on these topics. But one of the things, and so I was a little bummed because, there were people in my department, there were people studying things like lupus, and other autoimmune diseases. There was a very small microbiology department. I ended up studying in a lab that was host pathogen interactions. Still wasn't necessarily what I wanted to study, but it was closer to it. So I think that it is helpful if you can talk to somebody, if you can talk to someone who, in the program that you're applying to, in the PhD program you're applying to, I know that applying for PhD programs too is not cheap, right? But it's good if you talk to advisors to get a good sense of what kind of research you're getting into. So that's going to be my answer there too. All right. And then I got a question. Okay, this one I'll answer. I can answer live too. I recently got a question about medical writing on LinkedIn. I wanted to answer that as well on here. Again, Q&A, so you can ask your questions. So this person is moving from, let me look at the question they had asked. They were moving from being a scientist to wanting to become a medical writer. And they had asked, they had said that they wanted to get into freelance writing because if you watch the video I've done on how I became a medical writer, I do talk about the fact that I was a freelance writer for several years before I became a full-time medical writer. And actually, for about 2 years, I was a full-time freelance medical writer. So the question there was, how do I start getting some clients as a freelance medical writer? And one of the answers I gave her, or the answer that I'm going to give you, if you've been wondering about that, is to create a portfolio of work. So in academia, things are very performance based, which means that we put a lot more premium on publications, how many people have cited our publications, what talks we have given, things like that, how many classes we taught, how many students, like we put a lot more precedence on those things, right? It's very, very performance based. Not to say that non-academic jobs or industry jobs are not performance based either, but getting into academic jobs really weigh your performance. They weigh your productivity by how much you've published and so on. In industry and in non-academic jobs, their employers are not really looking at they're not really looking at your publications, and they're not really looking at your productivity in that sense. Okay, what they really want to see are your skills and how those skills have delivered results. And that's where our skills as PhDs, or the skills that we learn as PhDs, can cross over. This is where you may have heard about translatable or transferable skills, right? This is where you and I get to shine, because we do so much as PhDs in our programs. We do a whole lot than we give ourselves credit for, to be honest, a whole lot. Okay. And so, your PhD, like I'm just going to use myself as an example, because I have a STEM PhD. I did lab work. um, hey, Samantha, thank you. I'll answer that question. I did a lot of lab work. And so now, as somebody who was in the lab, I project managed, I organized the data, I presented the data, I did data analysis, I wrote up the data. So those are different skills. Those are writing skills, data analysis skills, computer skills, lab skills, all of these skills, right? And I think we do it so often that we think that these are not important, but these are the very skills that are needed in industry. And so, for somebody that is trying to transition from academia into medical writing, my best piece of advice to you is, whether you're trying to go freelance for a little bit, or you're trying to do a full-time role like I have a portfolio of work. Now, yes, your publications as a scientist or as an academic can count. However, it depends on the type of medical writing you will be doing. If I've talked about the different types of medical writing there's you can do medical writing as a regulatory writer. You can do medical writing as a educational writer. You can do medical writing in a marketing role like I am. So there are different types of medical writing. So you kind of have to decide, okay, which one do I want to be in, and then begin to create documents in that vertical. But yes, create the first thing I'll say is create a portfolio of work that you can show somebody that would want to hire you. It doesn't have to be a lot of pieces, it could just be 3 4 pieces, and that's helpful. So, great question, Samantha. Thanks for asking. I'm going to put your question up here on the screen. You said, hello, do you have any advice for international students for jobs post PhD? Yes, I do. I have a lot of advice. Thanks for asking. So, I would say that if you're an international student getting a PhD right now, and if you're enjoying this, please give this video a thumbs up. Please share it with somebody so that we can invite more people in. Okay, let's spread the bold PhD message everywhere. Okay. So there are so many pieces of advice I have here. Where do I start? So the first thing is that for international students, there is optional practical training. I'm sure you know that or have heard of that already. It's called the OPT for short. I say take advantage of that. If you are a student in a STEM field, okay, you do get up to, I think, 3 years. I do not know if it's changed, but it was about 3 years in my time. And this was not long ago. So in 2015, 2016, it was up to 3 years you could work. You first of all get 1 year, and then you can extend it for 2 more years. So 3 years. However, there are opportunities for you to change your visa status, or for you to change the and I'm sorry, I have my kid is over there making a lot of noise. So if you hear a child laughing and being rambunctious, that's what that is. But um knowing about the different visa types that opportunities that are available for international students is important. A lot of the time, international students wait to be sponsored by companies, but there are opportunities for certain types of international students, especially if you are in the STEM fields, to actually get some working opportunities, work visa opportunities beyond being sponsored by a company. So, being sponsored by a company, a visa type that is pretty common is the H-1B. people will go into jobs after their OPT, will get the H1, will get their maybe so if they're working at a university, let's say, they'll get the advisor to apply for an H1B for them, and then the H1B is good for I think 3 years. I never got an H1B, but I remember one of my colleagues was on an H1B. The only problem with an H1B, and this is exactly what happened to my colleague, is the fact that your H1B is very much tied. I don't know if it's changed again. I'm not familiar with those laws, like the updates in those laws. So if I'm wrong, you can correct me. But I know that as far as I'm concerned, an H1B is connected to your current employer. In certain circumstances, you can convert it to another employer. So if something happened with your current employer and you have to change to a different university or a different job, that H1B becomes invalid or needs to be transferred in a certain amount of time, or there are different clauses to that. So in our case, in my friend's case, the way it happened was that we were both postdocs at a university. At the time, I was applying for another visa type I'm going to talk about, known as the EB2 visa. And this is employment based, and you can apply yourself as long as you can show the US government that your employment in the US is in the national interest. And so I was applying for that. He was still on an H1B. And I remember suggesting the EB2 to him. But what ended up happening is the funding for our postdocs ran out. Our advisors' funding ran out. When it ran out, he had to lay us off. And in laying us all off, it meant that he lost his H1B status. At the time, my EB2 had been approved. I was still good to stay in the United States. He, I think, at a point had to leave the country and come back in. It was kind of complicated for him, but there was something like that he had to do. So my advice is, yes, there's H1B, and yes, there's OPT. And if you can, take advantage of those. But if you can prove, if you have publications, if you have work that proves the US government that your work is in the national interest of the United States, you can self-petition. All right. And I have a few videos on the Bold PhD where I talk about this. You can check those videos out. And you can apply for EB2. And when you apply for EB2 and you are approved, you do become a permanent resident of the United States. And at whichever point you qualify, you could apply for citizenship in the United States. So that's the advice I would give. Because, and I talk about visa status first because it's it's the thing that is the most rattling. It's the thing that makes you feel the most unstable. So once that's stabilized, everything else seems to fall in place, in my opinion. Whereas when that's not stable, when that's not resolved, you can't even always give 100% to your work because you're always kind of living in fear. I don't know if that makes sense. Let me know if that makes sense. And yeah, so that's the first piece of advice I'd give. And the other piece of advice I would say is to talk to people. Like, if don't think that an academic career is the only thing you can do. On this channel, I've talked about so many other ways that you can use your PhD beyond academic jobs. And I think more people should consider that. So that's another place to consider. And also, don't forget about international organizations. There are several international organizations that really value a PhD from the US, a PhD from a lot of other parts of the world too, actually. But you could leverage your PhD to work. I know a friend of mine's older sister who has a PhD in engineering who ended up working for the World Bank. I know I have a relative who works in the WHO with his PhD. So there are opportunities for PhDs in all these like large international organizations. And if you're somebody that likes to travel or would like to explore the world, it's a great opportunity to do that because they get transferred and they get to travel around quite a bit. I hope that your question, Samantha? Let me know. Yes. So that being said, and international students are always in a really precarious and interesting position, and maybe this is an opportunity. Yeah, this is an opportunity, absolutely, to kind of enlighten people about what it's like to be an international student in the US. And recently I did make a video on that. But the reality is, for international students, whilst maybe a US student could work on campus, well, usually as an international student, you can work on campus, but you can't work off campus. So that's not a possibility at all. We're not allowed to work off campus. There are certain opportunities we can't take. And also you've moved away from your home. Also, there's so many things, like you're living in fear a little bit, because you don't, even though things are okay, you don't want things to go wrong with your education. You worry about money sometimes, because you may have some money, but basically we're expected to have all the money up front to go to college. And even in the US, like, nobody has the money. Well, very few people have the money to go to college fully upfront, so it's a lot of sacrifice to be an international student. And yes, we made the choice to come here ourselves, but if you have friends that are international students, please support them. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was really, really great. I really enjoyed chatting with you all. It's so beautiful outside. I live in California and it's not snowing here. So for my friends where it's snowing, I sympathize. Oh, there is a question. Okay, let's see this question. Wait. Hello, I guess this is Zayla Venus. You said, hello, I'm about to graduate from my doctorate, but recently learned that about medical writing. What are some tips on building my portfolio from nothing? Oh, you must have missed me talking about that. So tips for building your portfolio from nothing. I think that start writing about topics that interest you, right? So is there a medical topic you're interested in? Could you write 500 words on that topic that are educational? All right. So I see people do this a lot. Sometimes people post those kind of pieces to places like LinkedIn or medium.com. These are great places for you to write. So if you want to get into medical writing, I say create some samples of your work. And the way that you start creating samples of your work is write about things that interest you. I happen to be a freelance writer for like a while. So sometimes I'm like, it's not fair. I had a little bit of an unfair advantage. So I got to write professionally for maybe 3 years before I actually got into my full-time role. So I got paid for my writing. So I wrote for medical practices. I wrote for a healthcare business here in San Diego. I wrote for a handful of other businesses. And so it was kind of well established. But let's say that you don't have that, right? Or even if you want to get that, or get your feet wet by getting a freelance writing client, I would say that start by writing something that you're interested about. For instance, let me look at Stat News for now. Let me see Stat News. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Okay. So I'll share my screen very briefly so that you can see this. Let me share the screen. Okay, so this is Stat News. This is a really popular medical website. It gives a lot, and then biotech website. It gives a lot of news on, new medical breakthroughs, breaking news on, COVID has been huge on here. The health startup stuff, who is buying, whose company. There's a lot of that. So let's say that you go through that and then you say, COVID vaccines for children, right? You choose, there's something on here about COVID vaccines for children. So that just sparked an idea. Okay. Here is an opinion that was written about high risk individuals should get priority access to COVID therapies. Maybe you have an opinion on that. You could write about that. So just come to a place like this, right, and gain some idea. Um, let's see. Maybe, okay, this over here talks about how medicine erased Black women from a white man's disease. You may click on that and find out what that's about and give your opinion on that. We can go to a place like healthline.com. Okay, that's an educational health website, and maybe there's some topics on there that may interest us. Okay, all right. Strong Black women are allowed to have depression too. It's Black History Month. If you can write to that, that is something, right? To write about sleep, nutrition, mental health, fitness. There's so many topics out there. So really, the world is your oyster. There are a lot of topics, right? And so think about maybe even in your doctorate program, whatever you worked on, right? What's the research on there? What is still not known? How can you explain that in layman's terms? Do that and create those pieces, and you'll find that if I see that, if I'm in a hiring position and I'm looking for writers, and I'll tell you something, finding good medical writers is hard. We've been trying to hire people at our company, and it's not easy to find good medical people who can like kind of hit the floor running. And so when you start creating this kind of stuff, okay, you actually make the hiring manager's life much easier. And of course, you would also be honing your skill in writing. There are a few books that I would recommend, and I don't know if I have them close by, but a few books I'm going to recommend for all those of you that are interested in becoming medical writers. On Writing Well, that's a good book. There is Elements of Style. You can get all of these on Amazon. That's a good book. I read a lot of marketing blogs because I work in marketing. So it makes sense for me to read those blogs. So examples of that include backlinko.com or the Content Marketing Institute, Social Media Examiner. Those are examples of marketing blogs. For those that want to get into health education, Healthline is a good one. Stat News is a good one. The Very Well Health family of websites, those are good websites to learn from. So to become a good writer, you need to read a lot. And I will say, I don't know how much I read every day, but at least an hour. Some of it passively, some of it intentionally. But yeah, that's how you build a portfolio from nothing. Read a lot and write a lot. I hope that answers the question. All right. So again, this was great. I was about to end before and then Zayla brought her question. Yes, absolutely. No problem. I had kind of touched on creating a portfolio, but I hadn't gone this deep anyway. So it's great that you brought up the question. But this is fantastic. Thank you so much. I am working on trying to go live on this channel more often. So, I hope to see you on subsequent lives. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you all for supporting. If you enjoyed this video, again, make sure to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that this is a channel to promote to people like you. It helps a whole deal. It helps. So thank you once again, and I'll catch you soon. Bye.